Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young. Oops. Let's restart this bitch. Yo, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young for TransformPoker.com. I'm going to be reviewing a 6-max hand for you guys. We've got Ace King in what ends up being a pretty deep stacked situation. So let's go through the action bit by bit here. So we open pre-flop, very standard. We get re-raised, so we're pretty happy about that because we have a really strong hand. Right off the bat, we have a decision. You could call here or you could 4-bet. I think 4-betting is by far and away the best play because of a few reasons. One, and most obviously, we have a great hand and it blocks a lot of the times that our opponent has aces or kings. So if we do get all in, it could seem scary to some of you maybe more passive players who aren't used to like aggressive pre-flop dynamics. But the good thing about it is it's pretty unlikely that you're going to see aces or kings. So at worst, you're just racing a lot of the time. And if you're against an opponent capable of bluffing you, you actually dominate a lot of their bluffing range because a lot of their hands that do best to 5-bet all in pre-flop are actually weaker ace X hands. So we might get all in against something like ace 5, and that would be pretty cool. So we make it 1275. I think it is a pretty good size, maybe just a hair small, because if you can put him into a shove or fold situation pre-flop instead of a situation where he's going to be calling now with like 8-7 suited and trying to win a pretty good pot, we're already offering him pretty great pot odds in position here. He only has to call 750 more to see a pot of about $20, and not to mention the implied odds if we're continuation betting as a bluff often, or he could just float with a gut shot, or possibly flop better than a good hand that we'd have like aces or kings. So jacking it up a little bit more pre-flop, not a bad idea. Otherwise, I would say the play is fine. Another cool thing about 4-betting here pre-flop is that these stack sizes are actually really great for it because it can be difficult for our opponent to go all in over the top of this because he would have to be risking $113 just about to win almost 20, maybe not even quite 20, yeah, just a bit under 20. So it's not a very good risk reward ratio for him. So it's pretty difficult for him to continue as a bluff. But if he's bluffing in this spot very often pre-flop, it's a good time to exploit a lot of like less balanced players here. So check that out. Keep an eye out for people who just ignore stack sizes when they're 3-betting pre-flop, because their value ranges aren't going to match up with how often they're bluffing, and you can take advantage of it by 4-bet bluffing pre-flop in spots like this. So since we're bluffing a lot, it's a great idea to go ahead and 4-bet. A time when you might not want to 4-bet is if you're against just an extremely tight player or against someone who you might want to mix it up against every once in a while. And by every once in a while, I mean maybe like 1 out of every 7 times you wouldn't 4-bet here, if that. So 4-bet, very good. We get flatted, which is kind of strange because I would expect most players in this situation to be 3-betting a fairly polarized range. And that's because if we 4-bet, you want a very easy decision in the cutoff's position between going all in or folding, because our range is going to be extremely strong or it's going to be a bluff. So flatting, unless we're just way overdoing it with bluffing, is going to be pretty difficult. And then again, that's part of the reason why I said you might want to make it a bit larger pre-flop. But as is, we actually end up flopping top pairs, so we don't have to worry about a lot of the tricky stuff that comes with being flatted in position in a spot like this. But I wouldn't expect our opponent to have a hand like ace-jack very often, potentially ace-queen, but I would say if he's continuing on this board, it's either a lighter call with something like 10s or jacks that he just decided not to 5-bet shove pre-flop, or it's just a hand that's going to be stronger than ours a lot of the time, like aces or queens. Even though those are very unlikely, there just aren't really many hands where he's happy about getting all in, and that's kind of another bad thing about playing post-flop with ace-king out of position. It's difficult in a 4-bet pot to get a lot of value. Let's back up to the flop here. Actually, when I talk about this sizing, if you check out the stack sizes, I think this is a bit too small because what we want to do, well, we actually have a few options if you want to get down to it. what you want to do is be able to test your opponent's stack by the river, and that includes the times that we're bluffing. So, like I said, it's very difficult for him to continue unless it's a lighter hand calling on the flop. So I don't think he would have a hand like ace-5 anymore in his range. Usually, in my experience, those get 3-bet and then folded or shoved pre-flop. So when we do bet and we get a call, we are presumably trying to get a call from something like King Jack suited that's floating us, or just have him bluff us with something that he no longer likes, like 8-7 of spades. He might min raise the flop. In any case, betting so small here is going to hamper our ability to get money in a few different instances. So if we're betting less than half the pot, actually closer to a third of the pot, we're going to be put in some really strange sizing situations on the turn and river where our sizing is going to be inconsistent. So it's much better for your overall value range to risk the same amount each street. And there's a lot of complicated math that goes into that. But roughly speaking, there's a lot of different variables, of course, other than a simple like game theory explanation of, like a simpler game that's like Hold'em. But in general, street by street, the same amount, the same bet size is going to be best. So what you want to do is figure out roughly in your mind, and it's fairly easy to do if you just go like, I would say about 2/3 pot, 2/3 pot, 2/3 pot here, you would be able to get all the money in by the river. And sometimes you'll be off by a little bit, but it's not a huge deal. So by this river, we're actually going to have about a pot-sized bet left if we keep betting this way. So what actually ends up happening in this hand is we go third pot, then third pot on the turn, which I don't like because we said, like, okay, if he's continuing on the flop, it's either with a hand that beats us or a float. So if we continue betting for value, really what are we hoping to accomplish? And we also have the ace of hearts in our hand, and that kind of makes it less likely that he could have a flush draw, but that flush draw including an ace makes it so it doesn't really matter as much. So that's third pot. I don't like it again. And then on the river, this is where it gets really weird. You guys can see we have like $81, and there's 77 in the pot. So shoving is kind of awkward, and then betting smaller and allowing him to do something is kind of awkward. If anything, I would prefer check calling here to try to pick off a flush draw. Just because betting 3 streets here, it's not like we expect jacks to call us down. We don't really expect him to have king queen to call us down that much, or a weaker ace. So betting this size is basically like, hey, please call me with ace king, and it lets him play like pretty well. Like if you saw someone doing this to you in a game, it's kind of unlikely that it's a bluff. It really just looks more like a please call me type of bet. And of course, someone could be doing that to exploit you and inducing that sort of thought process. But you guys can see in this cool Hold'em Manager hand replayer for 2+2 that it shows you the pot odds, and they're ridiculous. So it's going to be really tough for our opponent to fold, but he knows that we know that. So clearly a exploitive bet in some fashion here. Either we're leveling and trying to get him to fold way more often, but in my experience, no one, even if he does have a hand like ace-jack, he's not going to fold it getting almost 5-1. So, what do you think is going on here when someone bets this small into you? It's almost never a bluff. So we actually do get raised, which is very odd, but I think that makes it even more likely that we're actually just facing a very strong hand. Sometimes it could be a flush draw that's now just like, okay, I'm going to attack this weaker looking bet size. And if that's your plan, I think you should be calling this. So I would prefer bet calling if we're betting this small of a size and turning our hand face up rather than bet folding. Because if you're going to turn your hand face up and you're trying to get your opponent to attack a weaker looking bet when it's unlikely he's going to call, then that's kind of the point of the bet, right? So if you want to bet big and try to get value from slightly worse hands, that makes sense. You also do a better job representing your bluffs. But when you bet small like this, you're probably trying to induce a raise. So when you do induce that raise, sometimes I'm sure it's from a better hand, but maybe less likely if you think he's more apt to fast play in a already growing pot when we're betting like smaller sizes post flop. So you could look at it that way. So I think he would have a flush draw often enough to call this, and I would expect his preflop calling range to be so polarized that a lot of it would just be like 9-8 of hearts types hands. And there's also potential for like double floats, so he could have had something like king 10 of clubs and turned a club draw as well. So let me know what you guys think about bet calling this river or check calling it. I think both decisions are close, but I don't think I would be folding ace king in a 4-bet pot only about 130 big blinds deep. So looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Hero in the hand actually folds. And if you do like this video, please share it with one of your poker buddies. All right, take care, guys. See you next time.